scarce public financial resources, subsidizing design, innovation, and delivery of artificial intelligence services. There's a value for money question, right? Is there value for money from this investment today? Do we need to wait? There is a safety question, right? Which has been a really large part of a lot of the discussions that I've seen since this morning. And there is definitely an inclusion question, right? Which is, you could say, oh yeah, this is great, there is value for money here, but it may not be inclusive yet, right? And achieving those goals require us to go back and think about questions of how we collect data, how we build models, how we finance those models, and how we actually drive adoption. We have some phenomenal panelists today, so I want to really, and if time permits, I know 55 minutes is tight, but really allow for some sort of audience interaction and Q&A as well. But I want to kick us off. So we have here with us Zeba Siddiqui and Francis, who are both evaluators, who are going to come from the perspective of really what is the evidence telling us, right? So there was a systematic review that was funded by FCDO that Francis and Zeba were part of leading and delivering at Athena Infonomics, and they're going to share, Zeba will share the results, and then Francis will share how that's shaping our thinking as we think about AI evaluations. We're really honored to have Dr. Piyush Singla join us, who's Secretary Information Technology, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, who's really thinking about questions of how do you do this at scale and how can we make sure it's inclusive, and what do we need to get right in terms of the digital infrastructure on the upstream. And Professor Kavya, who's joining us from IIT Delhi, who's going to touch on this very critical aspect of adoption, which will not come without the trust infrastructure at the last mile and the human interface, and what we're learning through the work that she's been leading and delivering on. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Zeba to talk us through what we're learning from the FCDO systematic review. Clicker.
Thanks, Deepa. Thanks a lot for situating Athena's work in this landscape. As she mentioned, this was a rapid review that was commissioned to us by the RCC FCDO, Government of UK, University of Birmingham, and International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. The idea behind this was to map what kind of AI solutions or AI-enabled interventions are being used for what kind of agricultural problems. Now, having said that, we were also cognizant of the fact that we not only want to map it in a very technocentric manner, but we also want to understand what are some of the welfare-related indicators related to agriculture. I am drawn towards the point that one of the panelists in the previous health-related discussion they alluded to is that you have to also measure the right kind of outcomes. So in order to do that, we embedded rapid review, a very rigorous methodology with more qualitative and narrative-based methodology in order to cull out the more relevant, the more well-informed and well-rounded sort of details in terms of how does it impact smallholder farmers across Global South, across lower and middle income countries. I'd quickly mention what are some of the key evidence base that we found in this study. And then I would also discuss a little bit about what are some of the qualitative or narrative-based details that came or that were generated through this study. We looked at over 55 journals. We also looked at around 19 to 20 repositories, both academic and organizational repositories. And we also looked at over 100 grey literature, just to ensure that we're not missing out on anything relevant. And the time frame that we included in this study was from 2019 to 2024. We realized that there is a lot of dialogue around effectiveness of the AI models, of the AI interventions. However, where a critical gap lied was the fact that we didn't have much dialogue around what is its impact on poverty reduction, livelihood, decision-making power, and who does the decision-making power rest with. There is also, we did find that there is a lot of impetus on using AI models around crop production, pest detection, precision agriculture models, large language models. But they were directed to, or the studies or the evidence were essentially directed to understanding how are these effective, how are these solutions addressing or faring in terms of performing or not performing. Again, there was a lot of, in previous discussions, we see that there is a lot of dialogue around, not just measuring the pilot, but also measuring the sustainability of those interventions. This is something that we realized when we were doing the rapid review, and which was sort of also came up in the case studies and the deep dives, is that the AI models, especially in agriculture, are much at a very nascent stage. At a very pilot stage, we do see surge of a lot of supply side designs where AI is sort of being seen in agricultural practices. However, those models do not sustain. I'd briefly like to touch upon why do they not sustain, or what are some of the challenges that we encountered. And these are the gaps that we identified during our analysis. Firstly, adoption-related challenges is essentially driven by lack of trust. The limited amount of trust is because we do see, agriculture is essentially a very conventional, a very traditional field, wherein we see that, people from a certain generation, they're not ready to take that financial risk in order to take up a new technology. Hence, there is lack of adoption, and there is also the lack of trust in terms of adapting to something that may or may not lead to the desired sort of outcome. So we also realize that behavioral changes are very difficult to overcome. Sure. I'm actually not reading through the slides, so that's fine.
You're not using the slides at all?
No, I mean, it's just, I'll just, because I have my notes made, okay. So yeah. So in one of the case studies that we studied, that we did in the African context, is based out of Kenya, where we realized that a lot of cooperatives, farmer cooperatives that engage farmers, are also disseminating a lot of information in terms of how to use AI-enabled solutions for financial services, for banking services, and so on. While this is a good avenue to percolate information to the right kind of audience, what we realize is that these cooperatives, also called SACCOs in the local context, did have high amount of male membership or male concentration, as opposed to women who were not traditionally part of these organizations. Now that brings us to my second point, is gender disparity or gender inequality. AI that essentially has been sort of brought into any field, even in agriculture, to balance out that inequity, in a way also sometimes, not always, perpetuates these inequalities, in the sense that when we are trying to model anything in a particular context, it also has to be cognizant of what kind of context it is being tested in. It also has to be aware of what are some of the cultural gradients that are, that are prevalent in that particular environment. What we also realize is that human-in-the-loop design or human validation is something that is a challenge, and that is not being talked about enough in terms of the evidence. We do see inclusivity is something that is missing in the evidence base or in the literature, and we, when we talk to stakeholders, we talk to large cohort of people, from academics, from donors, to research organizations, and there is one thing that they definitely debated about, or they sort of argued about, is that human validation or inclusivity in that sense is something that should be at the very core of the design of any AI solution. And any solution that is being designed for ag-related problems should not just have technical experts, but should also have people from gender, from local community or community champions. Then we also realize that there is a big capacity building gap in terms of providing that kind of training to farmers to be able to not just adapt, but also understand these solutions. Digital literacy, as we all know, is a big challenge, and that also hinders the adoption of these AI-related solutions. At a large scale, what we realize is that governance or governance-related frameworks, AI frameworks, exist in a lot of geographies. However, ag-specific frameworks are missing from the discussion. So this is something, this is a definite policy takeaway that, of course, Francis would talk about it later when he talks about the horizon mapping from this entire project. But absence of ag-related governance or ag-related policy framework are a definite evidence gap. Absence of localized data or using average assumed data from national data sets, or absence of consent or taking consent from the farmers in terms of how the data is going to be used is also one sort of dialogue that is missing from the evidence base. We also realize that there are financial constraints, there are financial sort of functions, indicators that are attached to using any AI-enabled solutions in agriculture, while a large-scale farmer may function at economies of scale, a small-scale farmer may not do so, which is why there is a definite inertia in terms of adapting to these solutions. Again, coming back to the gender point, there is gap in terms of ownership of assets, ownership of land, ownership of smartphones, or even basic these kind of paraphernalias where women are sometimes at the fringes and not at the very core of these solutions. Financial inclusion is also a big problem when we're talking about enabling financial services through AI interventions, because a lot of times women are also left out from the banking sort of sector or formal banking networks. So these are some of the gaps that were flagged during our study, and I think I would just leave it to the fellow panelists to sort of allude to these points and also talk about them in details. So yeah, that's all from my end. Deepa.
Thank you, Zeba. A quick question before we go to the next panelist. Is there something that surprised you from the systematic review? We know about the digital literacy stuff. We know about the finance and scale stuff. Is there something that came out of that systematic review that you went, whoa, I didn't expect that?
I wouldn't say surprise. There were a lot of expected sort of evidence that emerged during the study, but something that really does, I'd say that, a lot of these solutions which should be directed at smallholder farmers, which form the majority of the group, are not directed towards them, are not made for them. Or even women who do not own the land, however, they are sort of forming a majority of the labor who are sort of performing, the daily labor at these lands. Why I say this, as I mentioned also, is that they're not part of the, the circle who owns that particular agricultural land, and hence they're not part of the solution as well. Which is why they could be at the other end of the spectrum using these solutions, but they're not at the other side wherein, they can contribute to the design side or the, the supply side, or how do you want these models to look like and all of those things. So this was definitely not surprising. I'd say expected, but yes, this is perplexing in a way that, you're not really addressing to the very core of the problem, or you're not addressing to the larger group, which are going to be your majority sort of, the user group. So yeah, that was something that emerged.
Thank you, Zeba.
Thanks,
Francis, do you want to come in?
One thing that really surprised me in the literature was we have shortlisted about 450 studies and then included about 51 studies. But the number of studies that did not report even basic what type of data they used for training those models, and what are the ground truthing, and what are the ethical issues that they looked into was really surprising. Like there's very few studies I've actually kind of like looked into and reported that in the final like a report. So that kind of really calls for a sector-wide like a checklist or like a reporting standard that everybody should follow.
I love that. I think, so we're hearing at least three things, right? We're sort of, firstly, we don't know. There isn't a lot of evidence on impact yet. Where there is some evidence, the impact hasn't lasted or sustained. It's very temporal. It's very projectized. So it's clearly this. And this is such a great segue, Dr. Singla, really, right? Because now is in government, when you're starting to think about how do you build systems and how can you approach this in a way where impact is delivered, where it matters, and is sustained. And that's a question that's true beyond artificial intelligence. I think we can draw from literature on public service delivery. We can draw from literature on good governance and where that's worked. I'd love to hear from you, building on your experience on, how you're thinking about it in Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you so much for having me. I think this is a very pertinent point to discuss. We do have pilots across the sectors, so do we have in agriculture as well. But issue is institutionalizing those pilots. And that's where comes the biggest challenge. I see it very differently. From the AI use perspective, there is some sort of FOMO fear of missing out, that if you are not doing anything, you are missing a huge thing. For sure, we are missing the huge thing, but most important is to do what is actually required on the ground, which has the adaptability, which has the uptake from the local population. For example, if I talk about Jammu and Kashmir, I've been there for last 14 years, working in different capacities in the senior administration. The farms of saffron farms in Pampur is very different from the apple orchards in Sopore. So it is very different in the rice fields of Jammu. So we have very diverse geographical regions, very diverse needs, very complex behavioral issues. So we cannot actually put in just one dimension that look whether this pilot will upskill or not. I remember we were doing, when the PM Kisan was launched, so we were interacting, I was the district magistrate of Anantnag district in Kashmir, so we were interacting a lot with the farmers, small marginal farmers. They have their own set of needs, own set of requirements. So unless any AI model speaks the language of a farmer, that upscalability will always be, I'm not saying a technical language per se, but how the trust develops. So in government, when we talk of scale, we talk of trust. So it is a service actually. It is not a small pilot you run in one district and suddenly it fades off in 1 year. That will not be adapted. It will only be upscaled, adapted when it is as a service. When farmer needs it, you provide it. So it's a transaction. It is every day's need. So if they want the weather advisory, so because the farmer will not wait for the seed sowing. So if he needs the weather advisory right now, very accurate, so he need to get it today. So if I say, okay, there is some algorithm problem, so my model drift is there, so I'll wait for 3 days. So his time is gone. So he'll lose a precious time of seed sowing. So I believe this is the real practical challenge which we see in AI these days. There are very beautiful pilots around and very with a great intention, just that it has more adaptability on the ground. The system is adopting that models and we are upscaling it in the interest of the public. So the last mile is benefited.
I love that. And I think this is why it's always exciting when government's in the room, right? Like, because that perspective and mindset and is so unique to a public sector leader. What is Jammu doing something about this already? Are there initiatives? What's being done, for instance, to address the last mile advisory that without latency, that is highly reliable?
That's the most challenging part of it, actually. So we, educational institutions, especially higher educational institutions, have a bigger role to play. We have IIT Jammu. So we are collaborating from the Jammu and Kashmir government side to come up with the Center of Excellence. Again, the mandate of that COE would be to create use cases which are actually upscalable and replicable and based on the needs of the ground. So we all must be knowing about the Daksh Kisan, that there are a lot of AI solutions, AI platforms, where weather advisories and other kind of things are given. But to have it more comprehensive, without latency or minimum latency, and suiting to the geographical needs of Jammu and Kashmir. The farmer in Jammu needs a very different advice than my farmer or horticulturist or orchardist in Kashmir. So that variance is huge. So we have to have those models which actually help with that. So our COE would be taking up very few use cases rather than what actually feels from our side it can be taken. No, we are thinking from the maximum problem perspective. So when you have unscheduled rains, when snows, untimely snow and sleet can damage the full apple crop. The full season is gone. So we are trying to work on those use cases and trying to come up. Most important is the data, in my opinion, right now. So we are coming up with good data sets so that we know what is the trend of last 20 years or 30 years about the weather advisories, how the forecast has been, what my farmer needs in that space. Then we can feed that data to the models in collaboration with the academia, industry, and can come up with the real use cases which are upscalable, rather than just pushing very less data from small district level sample size, which we do not want to do.
Lovely. So this, I think, and I struggle with this, right? As someone who's operated at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. We need policies to be designed to be scalable, but the reality is it has to be highly customized and bespoke, right? And that's a difficult intersection to navigate, right? Because when you're designing a new program or a policy, you're making some assumptions about what impact could look like, and you're operating with certain principles of how you will deliver that. Now, in the absence of feedback loops, right, we're never going to really know if the policy is really working or not. And that's a really, and this is a book that I love. It's called Seeing Like a State, which kind of talks about why public sector schemes fail, right? And at the heart of it, it's not because of intent or even complex political economy dynamics. They go on to say it's because we just don't learn. We have no way of learning cost effectively on what is and isn't working, so that our policies end up being static documents and systems that are stuck in bureaucratic inertia rather than allowing for dynamic engagement in terms of what is and isn't working. And I think that, Professor Kavya, probably is an area where I'd love for you to come in, because you've been thinking and working on questions of how do you do that? In practice, we all know it's important. We know there are challenges, right? Like, none of us in this room will say otherwise. We need feedback loops. But how can we build those systems of feedback loops and dynamic accountability and policy responsiveness?
Thank you for having me here. And the work done by Athena itself speaks so much about the need of the concept itself, and then the scalability, the data which they have collected. Much appreciated. So coming to the question, I would say that agriculture, healthcare, and welfare schemes, they are the source of big data in our country. And they should be treated like a big data source. They should not be treated like a lab scale work. We make policies, but then if you see our trajectory is from pilot to policy. This is a very wrong way, because pilot is a very, very controlled experiment. I do experiments in my lab, and the same thing when I take it out in the field, I know there is a small field, there is a village, a cohort, a specific demographic I am addressing to, I know the crops, and I am hand-holding that particular small group. So that is a pilot which I want, and then pretty much I am also interested that these are my expected outcomes. So everything is kind of framed in a predictable manner. Whereas, and then we very merrily compile those pilots and then go on and make a policy for the population or for the public. Now, this is where the disconnect happens, because we do not have multimodal data. Pilot is very, very limited to its frame boundaries, or when we can say it has its own boundaries which it has created. Whereas agriculture is different. Agriculture, I'm not touching upon healthcare, but it is no different than this. Speaking for agriculture exclusively, it is a multimodal sector. You just can't look at a picture and say that, all right, this is late blight of potato. You need to know which month it is, what variety it is, what is the soil condition, what weather you are growing in, what state it is coming from. But when we are when we are developing the models, we do not have a point where this multimodal data is integrating or collecting. So what miss is the accountability, because even if you see the advertisement of the ChatGPT and all, what are they saying? You ask a question and then they respond. But at the back end, there is a whole lot of training which goes inside. And if this training is not on Indian system, if this training is not hyper-localized, if this training is not repetitive, that means feedback models, as she rightly mentioned, if there is no feedback loop or a constant learning, we do not have, saying it is self-improvising. That would be technically little too alarming. But yes, the system should keep on improvising itself, because the continuous data is coming in. And where is this data coming in from? The multimodal sources which are at different positions in the country. Like rice, for example. Pan-India, we are growing rice. Pretty much all hybrid rice we are growing. So what is the problem in collecting the data from the different states? We would try and have our own area. This is our area where we are collecting the rice from, and then we have this data 10 times, same area being repeated. There is no diversion, or there is no extra data which is coming in, or an alternate. It could be a flood-borne, it could be a zinc-heavy soil, it could be a farm practice which needs to be improvised. Not everything needs a flush of pesticides, but generally a static trained model will give you a static trained response. And the worst part is there is no accountability. Wherever we are talking about trust factor, farmer feels, all right, now earlier you used to come and talk to me, now you have a device which is coming and talking to me, but what if it goes wrong? Even when farmer is standing in the field with traditional knowledge, with his all seniors and ancestors and very well experienced people, still things go wrong and there is nobody to hold accountable to. And then we expect him that this is the device, it should replace all your wisdom, all the experience, and this is the best thing to be. The world is just moving on moon right now with this device, so you just take it. And if you don't take it, he rightly said there is fear of missing out. You are no more the mainstream person. So there itself we are creating the layers, and these layers are kind of filters which are filtering the profit, which are filtering the benefits, which are creating barriers to accessibility and also to improvisation. A person or the group of people or the villages which are technically smart, accessible, having a good bandwidth of internet, near to city, having good smartphones, women usually excluded because either they do not have a smartphone or they do not have the time to do it. So we are kind of narrowing down with the data, with the users, and also with the area from which we are trying to train our problem, which we are trying to train our model. So in a way, I would say all of this, again, this becomes multimodal itself. If we have to make a policy, it should just not be pilot to policy, it should be policy at scale. Scale data should go into developing the policy, public to policy, not pilot to policy, where trust is embedded. I strongly speak for embedded AI, which is akin to embedded finance. For example, your WhatsApp and Airtel phone, they were not traditional banks, right? But then they allow you to make payments. Google, they allow you to make payments. As simple. In your existing smartphone, you have a payment making agency sitting there. As simple. You don't need the know-how of technology. You just need to have a bank which is somehow linked to it, and somehow you can make a payment. That is the user aspect of it. If we are able to make embedded agriculture, embedded AI for agriculture, the farmer should not feel, oh God, one more app. What do I do with it? वो पिछला वाला ही नहीं काम कर रहा है. It is not helping me anymore. And then gradually there is a trust deficit. So, and then it all feeds into, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, it all feeds into shallow policies. There is no feedback mechanism. There is no impact assessment of these policies. And then there is no improvisation or recovery mechanism that, okay, this didn't work, let us do that. And the last and the most critical thing is, if something goes wrong, who's to be held accountable? Because he has everything which can go wrong, and then he has nobody who will compensate or hold his hands for. So highest stakes lies at the last mile.
I love that. So I sit on the board of a crop insurance company, and we've been joking about this, and maybe it's not going to be a joke too soon in the future, is an insurance product for AI, right? So what happens? Who takes the liability of an advisory going wrong? And what's being built into advisory agents today, right? For instance, I'll give you an example of a pest management platform, right? They don't want to take the responsibility of what pesticide you use. So the farmer still makes the decisions. You simply provide a connecting bridge to, for example, a drone-based service or a mechanized human facilitated service. So it's still just a matchmaking facility, but you're not taking responsibility for advisory yet. I think that's a really powerful point. And I also want to, I think you touched on this so elegantly, exclusion by design, not inclusion by design. You talked about how, and again, we've talked about this, sometimes poverty is a policy status quo. It's not that by design you are perpetuating or maintaining a state of exclusion. These are such powerful points. I know Dr. Singla, one of the disadvantages of being the only public sector leader on the panel means, I don't know, like, these are very complicated issues, right? Like, as researchers, it's easy to sit here and think about it and write about it. And I think there is a role that we play, in a way, as mechanisms of evidence and accountability. But when you start thinking about practice, what's the thinking in government today about questions like these?
I think the most powerful point was accountability. So you cannot let AI to drive your car, and when someone, if that car hits someone, someone can just get scot-free. Someone has to be accountable. That's why in government, when the systems are designed, especially all the pilot projects, very carefully it is seen that whether that has a relevance for the last mile, it may or may not touch, but is there a relevance for the last mile? Here comes the role of data is very important. So I personally see we have so many departments which are data rich, but unfortunately the data is not granularized in a form and shape where there is interoperability. So to have that data layers interoperability, we need to have more systems of data sharing. In JNK, we are attempting to have some data lake concept. Data lake concept is a new concept where every department pull in their data. If you put AI layer over it, then there is a uniform reply. So we have seen a case study where if we put AI to one department, the response to a same query will be different than if I put AI to other departments' data. It's the same query, but the response will be different. Why? Because the data is in a different form and shape. So datas are not talking. So we have so much of data. So I think the most important critical right now, in our opinion, before we put any AI layer for any use case, is to have good data interoperability, good data exchange, which data can speak to each other, good form and shape of the data, which can be fed to the systems for training our models, so that we all talk of model drift, we talk of model hallucinations, very common words. But if our data is like that, what model is going to do? They are going to behave like that only.
Absolutely. I want to, and I know, Francis, you've been thinking about.
Just like to add one point. Sorry for this interjection. There is, if you just ponder upon it, there is a little bit of a stark difference when the models are made for healthcare, because there the jargon remains with the doctors. And that is consistent. Anywhere in the world, you would have typhoid called as typhoid and TB called as TB and cancer called as cancer. But when it comes to agriculture, the jargon sits with the farmer. And that is extremely, extremely diverse. I mean, we have language, we have dialect, and then we have household language, generational word for a thing. So creating a data lake and interoperability of the data becomes so crucial and critical in agriculture, and this should be addressed first, because for the same thing, you will have so many different words which are coming. It is just not how you describe your problem. Somebody would say stomach ache ho raha hai, somebody would say पेट में कुछ हो रहा है, somebody would say I am not feeling comfortable, and then doctor would understand based on the treatment reports. But in agriculture, it doesn't happen this way. So it is very, very sensitive, like a thin glass we are walking on. So data pipelines should be very well structured, culminating into data lakes, and then data talking to each other may possibly be a way wherein we are addressing the big data of agriculture, including all levels of dialects and even household language for a word.
Amazing. Gosh. Maybe, Francis, I'm going to make your job harder then, in a way, right? Because as an AI evaluator and as a sort of having spent a lot of time thinking about this and working on this, Francis, you've been trying to come up with almost like a framework to navigate this complexity, right? That ties in the interests and the incentives and the practical considerations that governments lead with, but also what we know is important from a technology governance regulation standpoint. And finally, an impact standpoint, right? In terms of what we know and what matters, right? Like, while the language might change, we've now worked across different states. The two biggest things every farmer wants is better prices and affordable inputs, right? In fact, credit is like if you could address these two, and then credit, in fact, dependence on credit goes down. So at least the needs are universal. At least there's enough convergence on some of the core things that has a huge impact on their quality of life. But Francis, how, if you were to sort of think about a framework, how would you go about doing it? And do you have advice for governments and practitioners and researchers?
Thanks, Deepa. Yeah. Both Dr. Singla and also Professor Kavya ended their like part with a very difficult question, like said the accountability question. When something goes wrong, who's accountable? Who's like responsible? And they also like talked about like there are several challenges that actually kind of leads to like say lack of interoperability of data or lack of feedback from the end users. All that kind of like leads to this like a problem. But like put the question differently. Like we have like lots of pilots from that's what we see in the literature review as well. But then almost like none of them have actually kind of like moved on to like kind of scale to kind of become part of the like public infrastructure. So what would we need for a pilot to become a full scale like project? Like say like what type of like an evaluation or governance architecture that we need to like put in place like so that that we are kind of like confident of the final like results. So along with the literature review, we also did like series of case studies in Africa and also in India. So from those case studies, like what we have actually distilled like three like buckets of like issues that that we would need for ensuring that the pilots when they move to like a scale, we could be like relatively like more confident of the results that like could like come out of that. Like so, the first like a pillar is actually the model safety, the model verification that pretty much almost like all the like model like builders, their application like engineers would actually do. They would be like looking at the consistency of the results that coming out of the model, the efficiency like of the model and so on. But in the framework that Athena has actually developed, the question that we actually ask is like beyond like model like safety. Like we are asking like model safety like for whom, like this has been like say the engineers do like a stress testing like for different types of inputs that like Professor Kavya talked about, like say the inputs could come from in varied like fashion because of the language actually changes and so on. So the model could be like tested in the lab like testing, but like was this really tested with like people in the real world like testing? So that's like for the basic like block for model safety. Like say a government that is expecting an AI model to like, be scaled, or like a donor that's actually aiming to fund this should be asking like a series of like question on the internal validity of the model itself, like what data this has been trained on. Is that being trained on like localized like a data that's specific to the context? That again, like it's quoting like Professor like Kavya. In AP, that's what like we see in Andhra Pradesh. Like within a vicinity of like a 20 kilometer, we see there is a massive difference in terms of like say the pest incidents in like oil palms, like because of like a difference in soil, like moisture, like a soil quality, like weather and so on. So the model needs to be trained on ultra like micro level data. So that the kind of like checklist that we should be looking at to begin with. The second block, again, Dr. Singla talked about, it's actually the trust and usability. So we should be actually asking question, is the model being tested in the real world with the people who would be ultimately like using it? Do they really understand the model? Or the model producing, like say, it could be like a chatbot and advisory, does it really produce outputs that are like relatable to them? Is it culturally, contextually like relevant like to them? And then there is another angle. So the end user is one group of like stakeholder. Then there is also the last mile workers who work with the farmers, who are another very important stakeholder in this human in the loop like whole process. These are the people who could actually like build the trust. So this like say extension workers like who've been working with the farmers. There is actually a level of trust that they enjoy. And now if we like build these models jointly with the last mile workers, like say your like say like the support team or like the like red team as we call in AI like language, that if this team includes the last mile worker themselves, and if the last mile workers own the model and could like really interpret the final output, that will increase the level of trust like for the like farmers to like take the like results. And then these two blocks, once we know that the model is safe and the model is like working well in the real world, like a setup, and this is also like culturally and contextually like relevant, and it's also ethically like relevant as well, then we should be looking at like what is the ultimate impact these models are creating. That's something that we see there is a massive gap in the literature. There's very little that is actually kind of looked into, like what's the final impact on the yield, or like say on like a farmer income and so on. There's one like a challenge, like even in the morning in Athena's like session on like benchmarking, we were talking about the ultimate impact is a distant goal. But AI is so fast that it can actually, the version 2 can come in like say 4 months. In 4 months, very little changes in agriculture. Yield may not change, like soil quality like may not change. But in impact, like what do we then look at? Like we should be looking at like at least like some other intermediate outcomes, like so for example, let's say incidence of like pest, or like say the pesticide like a residue. Those are intermediate like steps, but that will be absolutely important for us to reach the ultimate goal. So once we know that these intermediate steps work, then we could be like relatively confident of like the final step. Like in one of our ongoing work in Andhra Pradesh, that's what our idea. We are actually looking at the intermediate outcome. In the second phase, we will be looking at, say, what's the impact of the precision spraying that we are like promoting on the productivity and the like residue and so on. So just to summarize like all this, so the a donor or a government that is actually looking at like a funding or like scaling like AI should be looking at like 3 like things, like say, is it really like a safe to like implement that, there's an internal validity of the model, and then is it really working for the people who actually are intended to like use that, and then we should also be like sure of like what's the impact that it's creating.
Wow, thank you so much, Francis. So I do think, so what to measure, I think, consensus on the what to measure in the context of AI is a good question for us to all ask and find a good answer to and align on and say, make it so simple, at least you're not having to go back and think about what this means, so not everybody has to figure it out in their worlds. I know we have very little time, but I'd like to take at least 1 or 2 burning questions from I'm not taking anything from the Athena team, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Sailendra. I'm CEO of AgriGati. AgriGati we have deployed, we have prepared the model to use the DPI and UFI going to be from Government of India. And while doing that, I want to just share one example. Javier mentioned about extension worker ownership of the model, so that accountability is there, responsibility is there, someone is there to just see what is the result. What happened, we are NRI, and we are taking care of our native place, and for our native place, native block we have selected, and in our native block, we have developed this AgriGati, and we have increased 4 to 8 time income of the farmers.
Oh, lovely.
4 to 8 times. We are just converting information into income, not only just knowledge. We have seen the agri stack of Government of India. It is static. We have built up the dynamic one, so that there is a soil master sensor, there is a coordinator, and it is delivering directly to pesticide to the farmers. And that dynamism should be there, because it is day-to-day operation. Market is there, market price is there. What we have faced the problem, that the data at block level, district level from Government of India, that coordinate is not that much precise. Drone is going to somewhere else, and these things are there, and we make sure that our model is from bottom to bottom up, so that we have selected our native place, because we have to be accountable for our native place.
Okay, firstly, congratulations. I know I saw another hand go up, and can we just get a round of comments and questions, and then I'll come back.
Amazing discussion, and just to introduce myself, I'm a general manager and CTO of Sardar AI. We are AI readiness company. We have already trained 10 million people across the globe and we are creating the personalized AI role-based courses and certification. So one of the point that you have mentioned, and I would like to echo on that as well. I feel the mechanism which is missing is a reward mechanism. In India, Indian runs by heart. So, if you want to have an embedded AI, if you want to have an inclusive administration, if you want to have a proper framework, I feel that reward mechanism has to be driven by the government. So that
I mean,
point,
incentive.
exactly, ma'am. Because see, in India, I think it's like it's always, what's in it for me. So, if we can figure out that route, I feel we will get the last mile information from every single farmer you want. The reason everybody is on the WhatsApp, I tell you, we are seeing that there is a digital literacy problem. We have done a survey of more than like 10 million people in India. We see everybody out of 10 million people, like 98% people are using WhatsApp. So I feel that it's not about the ecosystem, it's about making the reward mechanism much more stronger. But the amazing panel it was and topic was really touchy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Gosh, quite a few hands. I'm only going to be able to take two more. I know he had his hand up before, and then you, and I apologize for that. I'm going to have to.
Yeah, Madam, this is Gururaj Mahajan. I'm the coordinator for Smart Agriculture and Entrepreneurship Program in India for Tampere University, Finland. So we have been working with agricultural universities from past 14 years. So as you mentioned, we worked on participatory development. So my question to you is, you mentioned about this is an era of embedded AI devices which are happening. For example, one of the Pune-based company, they are looking for the soil testing. As the soil testing cannot take place across the India, so there are limited labs. My question to you is, what is the solution to we reach out to the final last mile farmers, madam? I mean, specifically final marginal farmers, madam.
I'll come back after that.
One more.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this last opportunity to interact with wonderful panel. Yeah, absolutely. So it's more of a question, or I would not like to bias this discussion by giving my introduction immediately, but I'll hold it for some time. But I can give you an experience that I have an experience of meeting or managing the inputs from 2.5 or 25 million farmers odd. Okay. Now my point is that I'm also a practitioner of AI and from UT Austin, so I keep working on the problems. I always believe that agri is very complex in India. Why don't we take lessons 5 years, 10 years back, which happened in banking and health sector? See, what happened was, when the AI got introduced, banking and health never went for solving everybody's problem on same day. We don't need to boil the ocean. We just need to pick up two clear-cut problems, maybe state-wise, maybe central-wise. Like look at banking. Thousands of problems, but they picked up only that, how do I manage my fraud system? They solved that top notch, and then they created a web of solving the other problems. Similarly, healthcare. If I go back 10 years or 8 years back when the AI started building up before it coming to India, it was primarily how do I solve the breast cancer problem? Nothing else. And whole lot of exercise across the US and other part of the world, directly or discreetly, were focused only on collecting the information around the same. Nothing else, no else to be solved. And they just nailed it. That created an ecosystem, the environment, the confidence. So what I'm trying to say, can we portray that and bring out agriculture issue 1 or 2 and focus only on that? Thank you. Thank you.
There's a data quality question, particularly Government of India. There is an incentive question, right? There is a question of, and maybe that's what we end with. What's that one burning thing we should solve for in agriculture? And then there is a question of feedback loop. Can we do rapid? Who can take? Can I give it? Yeah, maybe the incentive question.
Small part. So, just
Each of you could, and also the burning question. What is that one problem that you think we should solve for, and then we can close?
I think it was discussed about the health and the finance sector. It is about creating the DPI, digital public infrastructure, which is like a pipeline which can be used for any different kind of purposes. So, and many use cases can be drawn to it. Where we are heading is is creating a DPI structure, so which is based on trust, and you can use n number of cases over the years. Over to the next speaker.
Thank you. Very quickly, I just want to respond to your question. When I said like making the last mile workers part of the design team, I meant was they would be part of the trust building process in feeding into that, not making them as accountable, but like this human in the loop would actually having the last mile worker would really kind of help design and also help the workers like own this, and then would be able to like build the trust of the like farmers. And then in one of the ongoing work that we are thinking about, like involving last mile workers who would also be empowered to override the results or like the advisory of the like AI, and they would feed that information back for the next round the model to like develop. So that's the human in the loop that would make the whole process more trustable and accountable.
I would answer your question about how to embed AI into the systems. So it is not impossible, but it is not that easy. We are doing it in different areas, like I said about finance. I also said about like your communication for WhatsApp. But agriculture is little diverse, and agriculture is very, very personal to the last ground. And the impact is huge, not only for the farmer, but even for the nation. It's a cascading effect. The crop loss converts into food loss, and then dollar loss, so on and so forth. So what I can say is right now that in order to make embed AI for agriculture, it should be the layers which need to be strengthened, and it should be a top-down approach. The problem definition should be bottom-up, but the framework should be top-down, wherein the government or the institution, the responsible institution like ICAR or maybe IIT Delhi who's working on that, so would just know that in which area, what is the problem, who are all the stakeholders, just connect them, make a small nugget of all the information which is coming up, and then create layers, empower each and every layer, and there could be a feedback loop which is created. So that is the only way we can have backward and forward talking of the information which is moving, and that actually embeds. First it will embed in the pipeline, and then it will embed on the device.
Thanks for that discussion. And one last, as Deepa said, one final thought before we close. I think inclusivity is definitely one thing that would be a key takeaway for me. As we talked about having a sweet spot between, context specific, but also, intersection of policy and practice. I think participatory designs more as opposed to hand-me-down approaches would definitely be a key takeaway here.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, that's
Thank you
it.
so
Thanks.
much. A huge round of applause for the fantastic. Maybe if we met a year from now and did the systematic review again, we'd see very different results. In anticipation of that, thank you all for being a wonderful audience and for being here with us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much. Okay, and do the audience have to stay for that? Go have lunch. Yeah.
Thank you. Nice session. Amazing session.